I'm Eriko Sato. I'm the coordinator of the MIC Distinguished Lecture Series. Thank you for joining us for today's special lecture. The MIC, or the Center for Multilingual and Intercultural Communication, was founded in 2014 by Agnes Hu, who is a professor of applied linguistics. The MIC provides a creative and collaborative platform for scholars and students to explore the complex and dynamic nature of communication involving participants from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds. MIC's Distinguished Lecture Series brings to Stony Brook cutting-edge research that addresses today's important and urgent questions arising from globalization. Today's lecture is co-sponsored by the Department of Asian and Asian American Studies. I want to thank the assistant to the director, Chikako Nakamura, and the three intern students, wonderful intern students, Claudia Motley, Brian Tavares, and Joshua Sanground, for preparing all the technical details for our very first virtual lecture in Zoom. We will have a question and answer session after the lecture, so please put your questions into the chat box in Zoom. Please use the default mode, which is to everyone. They will be all addressed as long as the time allows us during the Q&A session. Today, we are extremely privileged to have Dr. Julian Chen, Senior Lecturer of Applied Linguistics and TESOL in the School of Education at Curtin University in Australia. Dr. Chen earned his PhD in Curriculum and Instruction in TESOL from University of Maryland in 2012. He worked as a postdoctoral fellow at Research Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences in Taiwan from 2012 to 2013. Then he joined Stony Brook University in 2013 as the Technical Director of Language Learning and Research Center, LLRC. During his stay at Stony Brook, he collaborated with many language instructors across programs for research. Currently, he is faculty member of Curtin University, supervising higher degree research students in the areas of TESOL, world language teaching, applied linguistics, and educational technology. Well-versed in mixed methods designs and narrative, ethnographic and participatory action research, Dr. Chen has conducted studies related to technology-mediated task-based language teaching, 3D virtual environments, teacher identity, and learner engagement. He has led multiple grant projects to build interdisciplinary synergy across applied linguistics, education, and STEM. His work has appeared in high-impact flagship journals, including but not limited to TESOL Quarterly, Systems, Modern Language Journal, Language Teaching Research, Computers and Education, Recall, and Computer-Assisted Language Learning. Dr. Chen is currently authoring a book, A Virtual Turn in Language Teaching and Research Using Second Life Effectively, which is under the contract with Routledge. Dr. Chen is also currently editing a book entitled Emergency Remote Teaching and Beyond, Voices from World Language Teachers and Researchers, to be published by Springer. It's a confession time. I was a strong believer of a traditional classroom teaching until 6 years ago. But I now believe that online teaching can be made extremely effective if and only if they are designed by the teachers who are creative and open-minded and willing to work with the students and technology specialists and willing to engage in action research in each class. Since March, we have been mostly teaching online at Stony Brook. Faculty, staff, students, and administrators need to know the future direction of teaching and learning. So today's lecture by Dr. Julian Chen is very timely. His lecture title is In Every Crisis Lies Opportunity, Emergency Remote Teaching, Research, and Futuremost Directions.
Thank you so much, Eriko-san, for showering me with praise. Oh, well, I feel so humbled and also thrilled to have the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. As Eriko just mentioned, I think this topic couldn't have come more timely, and it has impacted all of us, all the language stakeholders. And more than thrilled to share with you, those best practices and also some innovative research approaches. Today, I want to just walk you through some best cases and also some research approaches that we can take away from today's talk. I hope that you can find today's talk meaningful, engaging, applicable to your own setting as well. Without much further ado, I divided today's topic into two parts. The first part is focused on pedagogy, and the second part is focused on research. Because I know we have some students here as well, and also language teachers as well. So I think I will try to strike a balance between these two. Feel free to put in any thoughts or any input in your text chat box, and I will try to address them later on after my talk. So we will try to define what we mean by ERT, emergency remote teaching, or so-called teaching online, and what's the difference between online teaching and teaching online, and then what kind of impact it has on all of us, recently. And then I'm going to share with you a successful story, a case at Curtin, my institution, looking at my colleagues in Asian language program, how they rose to the occasion from knowing nothing about online teaching to developing their first online units. And then I'm going to zoom in on two of my cases using my current projects in terms of how I supervise, mentor my HDR, so-called higher degree by research students or postgrad students, fully online environment, and also what about other world language researchers conduct their studies in a fully online kind of environment. So I'm going to wrap up my session with some implications we can draw from the whole phenomenon and also drawing from my research and some best practices from my colleagues as well. Then I'm going to hear stories, and that's about today's talk. Because it's a Zoom kind of a presentation, I try to make it more interactive, engaging, not just you listening to my talk, but also I want you to have the participation, be part of it. The first thing we can do is I want to know how much you know about the difference between online teaching versus teaching online, or so-called emergency remote teaching. So based on your background knowledge, based on your experience, based on what you think about these two, so please type in some kind of comments under these two categories. So what do you know about online teaching? What do you think about online teaching? What do you think online teaching is? And what do you think about teaching online, or what we call emergency remote teaching is? A synchronous hybrid, all right. Self-learning for online teaching. Remote teaching using technology. Okay, what about teaching online? We got no choice. Okay, you got no choice. Okay, you should be able to see the difference between these two later on. So actually, there's a difference, a big difference between these two. Now we are actually working on emergency remote teaching, ERT. The difference between these two is that ERT, in a nutshell, is that it's a rapid, temporary shift from everything you're doing in a classroom teaching kind of or learning kind of format and put it onto the online mode, probably overnight, in a week or two. In translation, you won't have time to actually prep or actually think thoughtfully and strategically about how you're going to put your online course more engaging and interactive and also more robust, because you don't have time. Some of you probably don't have the prior online teaching experience and you are forced to teach online right away. That's what we call crisis teaching, because you want to respond to the pandemic crisis, right? Usually you don't have enough time, sufficient time to do anything further. And if we look at more closely these two, so usually for online teaching and learning, you will have sufficient time to prep. Usually it takes 6 to 9 months to prep, because you need the training, you need professional development in terms of how to not only just put everything you're doing in a face-to-face classroom to the online mode, but also what kind of technology and the tools you can capitalize on and to maximize, to optimize, to enhance learning, not in a face-to-face kind of setting, but in a fully online mode. Because we know teaching in a face-to-face setting is totally different from teaching online. Also, some of you and some of the teachers don't have any online teaching background. you can imagine how the steep the learning curve will be for them when they have to teach online. And also when you talk about online teaching or developing online teaching courses, you usually think about online as a primary kind of goal, whereas emergency remote teaching or so-called ERT doesn't think about online per se, but think about how we're going to transfer whatever we're doing in a face-to-face setting to the online mode. It's a strike kind of like, difference between these two. Another thing we had to consider is different factors when you design a teaching or learning environment. For example, is your course going to be fully online or blended? And is it like a small class size or big class size? Will you allow students to collaborate with each other or just doing their individual work? And will you be present in real-time kind of a video conferencing or virtual classroom kind of setting, or you'll be only using offline or synchronous kind of a discussion board without seeing your students in real time? And will you give your students actually enough exposure to the input and encourage them to produce output in a fully online space? Will they have the chance to practice again at their own pace, anytime, anywhere, by checking their answers? When they respond to the system, right, will they get the answer from it? Like automatic kind of feedback? These are all the factors we had to consider when we develop an online unit or course. Typical planning, preparation, development time for a fully online course, it takes 6 to 9 months, as I just mentioned. You don't have such a luxury when everything is just hitting on you so suddenly and abruptly. And then you don't have a time to prep or to develop your professional kind of skill set because you only have 1, 2, or 4 weeks to prep. So you can imagine the stress, the panic. Let's do another brainstorming. I want to know, if you are all language teachers and students, how has ERT impacted you? So in terms of language teaching versus language learning, so how has it impacted you on many different levels? So as a language learner, so feel free, okay, I see one comment here. I'm actually braver on Zoom than I will be in person. In other words, you think that you will actually speak more and probably participate more actively in the online virtual space or self-learning. Okay, for language educator or teacher, greatly enhance my experience. For students, more comfortable for me to attend classes, less active than taking classes in person, less feedback, taking much more preparation, absolutely. Less engaged students, miss the interaction with small class, communication among peers is much more difficult. So you are not alone because what I'm going to share with you, show you, is something that we did at the Curtin in my institution, and how those language teachers and students actually suffering in the beginning, but how they actually use different kind of strategies or professional development to lift themselves up, and how they teach and learn outside the box. As you can see, ERT has impacted not just on learning or teaching or instructional kind of aspect, but also the social, emotional learning or so-called affective well-being kind of aspects. As we know, learning and teaching in a fully online or remote kind of environment is quite isolating, kind of like, social distancing, or we call it virtual isolation or psychological distance, because you cannot see anyone, or sometimes if the teacher only uses discussion board or so-called asynchronous kind of learning mode, you don't have a synchronous like real-time communication or interaction with your peers, with your teacher, and you'll feel even more isolated. And sometimes for teachers, you don't have ongoing support from your peers or from your coordinators, from your supervisors. And sometimes you are doubting, you're second-guessing yourself. Can I deliver my course online really, well, successfully, effectively? And sometimes you don't have the professional training tailored to language teachers' needs. So sometimes when you go to those professional technical workshops or professional training workshops, they only talk to the audience who are probably in general education. and then you starting to doubting your efficacy, self-esteem, and the list still goes on. If you think about online delivery, there are so many considerations that we had to bear in mind. For example, different types of interaction, student to student, student to teacher, student to content, and can you make your course engaging, meaningful? And have you considered different aspects, as I mentioned, social emotional, not just language, but also cognitive, psycholinguistic kind of aspects as well. I have to stress again, it's not just dumping everything you do in a classroom onto the online kind of a learning environment. It's not going to work. Our younger generation, the so-called digital natives these days, some of them actually only use mobile phones to access the class materials. When you design or develop an online course, is your interface, your online course compatible with their mobile screen? So that's another consideration you had to address. So now I'm going to share with you a very successful kind of case in my institution, Curtin University, looking at my colleagues in the Asian language program, how they developed their first online unit using different types of digital technologies and also pedagogy as well. This is what happened before COVID-19 started. Some of my colleagues in Asian language program, they prefer the old school way of teaching. So they like to use paper and pencil and mark using the red pen to mark students' exercises. And then they like to have a lot of hard copies. It's only face-to-face. In our school of education, most of the units actually deliver online because we try to suit the needs of the market, the demands. So you have face-to-face students, face-to-face class, but you also have online open university. So everything is online. But somehow our Asian language program got away with that. They didn't have any online offerings for those cohorts. So they feel comfortable just teaching face-to-face, and they still did the role drilling all the time. So if you look at this Blackboard side, this is what happened before. They did have a Blackboard side like this, but you can see it's very linear. It's like archive everything, like folders, everything you put in a classroom, the material, you just like dump it into the Blackboard side. So that's what happened before the pandemic. Now, when the outbreak just hit all of us in the beginning, back in March, we were told that we only have 2 weeks to put everything online. Not just online, but also addressing all the requirements and criteria that an online course was asking. For our applied linguistics and TESOL program, we already got an online component, so we are not kind of worried about it. For Asian language cohorts, my colleagues, they were stressed out. They were like in panic mode. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know where to start and how to start it. So they went to the workshops, tried to pick up some skills, but everything just came so quickly. So they were very, very nervous about online teaching. So they only had to copy everything from the face-to-face classroom to the online mode, and it didn't look good. So they felt stressed, they felt so isolated, and they just didn't have the support. We were required, all the online courses, we call it units here, all the online units here at the Curtin University in Australia needed to have the real-time component. It's not just using discussion board, but you also have, like tutors also have to have the real-time virtual classroom interaction with the students on a weekly basis. You know, when you are online, sometimes they use the breakout room. Students appear that they were there. However, when you call their name, they didn't respond. No matter how many times you call their name, they just didn't respond. So we call it student ghosting. They ghosted in the room, they never showed up. So they were elsewhere. They were physically elsewhere. So they just appear in the room virtually. That frustrated a lot of colleagues. When I saw it, I thought, okay, I'm going to support them. I'm going to just help my Asian language colleagues so that they could actually learn and grow using this particular opportunity. So I got a small grant from a school, and then I tried to mentor, support my colleagues. I also conducted a lot of personalized workshops for language teachers for them. Also, I try to encourage them to, especially for course coordinators, to keep supervising their tutors. You will see in a minute that one of our tutors in a Chinese language program was a novice teacher who never taught the Chinese unit before, not to mention teaching the online unit right away. So you can imagine the stress, pressure. I also try to ask them to reflect, because we know teaching is a reflective practice, right? You're not just teaching, you also have to reflect all the time. I created a Google document for them to reflect on their teaching every time when they finish a session. And then also I provided ongoing kind of support for them. So we did the professional debriefing using Zoom and using Microsoft Teams. And then I also taught my colleagues, especially the course coordinators, to conduct the virtual classroom observation. So you can imagine, usually when you do the classroom observation in a classroom, right, you can go to the classroom, watch the teacher teaching, and then debrief with the teacher afterwards. Because of the COVID-19, the social distancing, you can't do that. So what we did was, every time when the tutor finished a session, we use Collaborate. So Collaborate is like a virtual classroom, real-time kind of a video conferencing. That's how the tutor interacts with the students in real time. So every time when she finished the session, that will be recorded. So the coordinator will watch, like observe, right, virtually, what she did with the students, and then try to take some notes and then try to debrief with her later on. So now I'm going to show you some examples. This is a journal reflection. The novice teacher, her name is Jessica, and then that is her first entry. And you can see that I did my commenting on the side. I tried to shadow her virtually, couldn't actually meet with each other in person. So I can only do everything online at that time, back in March. And then I can see that I try to provide her with my input, my guidance, my kind of like strategies that actually will help her improve her teaching. And then we also did professional development, like using Zoom or Microsoft Teams. I also created an agenda here so they knew what we're going to discuss. And now I'm going to share with you how the course coordinator, the Chinese coordinator, conducted her online virtual supervision with Jessica's class. And this is the first online observation or supervision, probably back in April at that time. Probably only lasts for 2 minutes, and you guys listen and see how the coordinator debriefed with Jessica.
Tutors recording so we can exchange ideas on how to improve and the tutorial session. So I watched yours, and that's only one session, so it's not too much for me.
It's exciting. It's a nightmare.
Yeah. Happens that the second week is Good Friday, so I think it's very courageous for you to take back on this. I understand how it must be such a big hurdle to live, and for me as well, same thing, and we just suddenly had to do all this, take up all these technologies overnight. So that's really good that you conducted the first session and successfully. It didn't stop. It didn't just went nowhere. Yeah, so it did a good job. Just a few observations maybe for you to consider.
Yeah.
I mean, watching yours is also really good for me because I can reflect on my own as well.
So that was the first session when she started her supervision the first time with Jessica. Let's listen to the last supervision and see how much Jessica has changed or transformed.
Personally, I think it saved me a lot of time on traveling. But this is personal. In regard of students' reaction, I'm happy that there are still some students who show their strong motivation in learning. After every tutorial, some students will ask me to stay with them online, and they will ask me some questions on the workbook or talk about their lives, which is really good. But this is something that I feel happy about. Your advice and advice from Julian helped me to organize and devise the teaching activities, and I follow your advice and do it. I think which is quite effective, because sometimes I need someone who can give me the opposite opinion.
Can you feel the difference from her first teaching until now? That she has gained so much she has grown so much, and she has got her confidence back, self-esteem back, and she's more relaxed. So that's what the online supervision is doing to Jessica, to make her become a more capable and online teacher, not just language teacher, but now she could teach online. That's quite empowering, because I think that especially for novice teachers and everyone who is teaching the online course for the first time, you need this kind of support, you need this kind of supervision, you need this kind of guidance to help you fine-tune your teaching. That's what the project is about, to mentor, to support, to empower language teachers, especially for novice language teachers. Again, after the first semester, and the head of school actually approached me, and also the director of teaching and learning approached me. Given the fact that my specialization is in technology-enhanced language teaching, text-based language teaching, they know that I could probably contribute to the whole new unit development. Because remember, if you recall that I told you guys about in the beginning, the Asian language units courses didn't have any online component. So now is a time. So they thought it's the best time for them to reinvigorate the whole Asian language units, especially for beginners. So we formed a task force, including me, and also the tutors, coordinators, and also we have a team of tech support. Joining forces, we start to streamline the old school way of face-to-face teaching and learning. And then we try to see if we can actually deliver fully online. So at the end of the day, down the track, we are hopefully, we could actually sell it to the Open University Australia. So we can actually offer them through Open University Australia. So we can actually attract more students. And how do we prepare? Again, we review all the materials, and we use backward design. And also, we follow the Apple standards, 5 Cs. I think Chicago, Erica, Sarah probably already aware, very familiar with the 5 Cs. And then we try to use Storyboard to do the backward design and to streamline all the lectures topics. And then we try to test out different digital tools to make sure that they can enhance learning and also facilitate teaching. And then we keep doing the debriefing sessions with all the stakeholders. So these are the 5 Cs. As we know, teaching, language teaching and learning is not just teaching grammar or teaching linguistics, but also you have to address other 5 Cs, right? In the culture, communication, comparison, connection. Also, at the end of the day, down the track, you want to communicate with the speakers of the target community, right? Target language community. For example, if you're learning Japanese, you want to go to Japan, or you want to communicate with the Japanese native speakers as well. That's the standards we are actually following. And then in the beginning of our development, we also use the storyboard kind of mechanism to lay out all the lectures, topics, and then we try to see how we can actually streamline them and maybe remove some of the lectures or topics that are redundant and add something more. So we did that as a team. The tech support team, the tutor, and me. And then we kept, doing the Microsoft Teams support, like debriefing. For example, Elizabeth is the Japanese tutor. When she finished developing a unit or some kind of module, she would like to take a look and provide our input as well. So she can actually modify or revise her development. When Elizabeth and Jessica finished their first module, we did a test write, and we tried to include the director of teaching and learning and both course coordinators and the tutors and me and the tech support team. We tried to form a meeting and we walked them through the first module and see what kind of areas they find very, very successful and effective, and what kind of areas they feel like still need some improvement. So we revised them before we roll it out. And what's valuable about this project is that we piloted the whole course, the whole unit with our former students. We try to get a more critical kind of perspective from the stakeholders. So we asked them to test out, to play with the whole new online unit and see what they feel about the direction, if the direction is going well or, still not working. Thankfully, it was quite well received. They found it quite engaging. and quite interactive, but they also give us some kind of feedback so we can actually improve. So now I'm going to walk you through a module so you can see what we did for the first unit. So this is the first module. If you can recall, the first Blackboard kind of a unit is very linear, everything's there. And now this one is a new development. You can see you got a multimodal, you have a video overview. The lecturer will actually talk about what is this course, what the unit is about. And then you can also do the writing activity. Ai, aoi, e, ue, ki. So this, remember, this is a beginner's unit, and they can also do the flashcard practice. I know it's going to be wrong, and you can check your answer. And then it's another flashcard activity. And you can also practice your speaking. はじめまして。私はカイトです。どうぞよろしく. It's not just put everything there, but you try to make it more appealing, engaging. What I like about this new unit development is the speech recognition. Sometimes you can't just teach students like for 2 hours and then hopefully, and hope that they can actually master the language overnight. You can. So they have to practice again and again, exposed to the input, produce the output. So this one is like a speaking exercise, right? So they can actually practice speaking, at their own pace, anytime, anywhere. So for example, how to say teacher, if I say sensei, so it's correct. San, incorrect. So maybe I pronounce it wrong. So this is a correct pronunciation, correct answer. So they will help me to practice again. And then after they practice all the exercises, they have to do the so-called workbook, like a homework. So they have to upload their speaking practice through this palette kind of a platform. So they could, for example, add a video of your own self-introduction in Japanese. So similar to VoiceThread, you can use a video, record your video and the speaking, so the tutor or lecturer will actually give you feedback based on your speaking output and quality. So look at what this student actually produced.
はじめまして。私はサミュエルです。どうぞよろしく。はじめまして。私はエレンです。どうぞよろしく。
So they could practice again. So when they're ready, they can upload their speaking. So as you can see, the big contrast between the first Japanese course, the Blackboard side, to what we have here now. It's quite empowering and quite inspiring as well to see this kind of a big change, big development. I don't think we have time, but just bear this question in mind. So how has ERT, imaginary remote teaching, impacted you as a researcher / supervisor? If you're supervising any student, how has it impacted you? And also, if you are a grad student, if you are a postgraduate student, will you be able to collect your data, or you have to change your plan? As we know, international students actually is a driving force of the economy and also revenue of the higher education sector, especially in Australia. I don't know about, I think probably the same case in the States. So the high increasing kind of student enrollments, according to the statistics, just, mind-blowing. But because of COVID-19, it has changed the whole dynamic, especially for PhD students, right? For research students, they feel even more isolated. And also that kind of impact their mental health and, the stress you can only imagine. When I started to do this project, mentoring not just my HDR, so-called higher degree by research or postgrad students, PhD, master students, I just thought about my students, who are international students, and now they couldn't go back home. And look at the journal, the first entry that my student actually wrote. And he said, when my life becomes smaller, just spending my time from laptop, bed, kitchen only, it's very frustrating for me. The pandemic also makes me worry about my health. I'm afraid that if I get infected and die, when I'm here in Australia, so far away from my family, I also feel worried about my family's safety, especially my mom in Indonesia. Maybe it's not directly linked to my study, but it still became my concern during this hard time. COVID-19 has changed the schedule that I had planned before. I cannot collect data soon. I should delay and postpone the process of collecting data till everything becomes normal. It just broke my heart. I want to do more for my students, not only for my students, but for all the students who actually share the same concerns. So I got another grant, school funded grant, small grant, but it allows me to do something for my students. This project is looking at how we can actually support, mentor so-called emerging researchers, such as PhD students, through international collaboration. So I'm currently collaborating with another researcher lecturer at Aberdeen University in Scotland. So both our students actually are participating in this project, but also we attract some international PhD students or master students in a group. So we're using participatory action research design and try to empower them and try to let it have their voice heard. And also we try to follow this iterative kind of process, such as planning, acting, observing, evaluating, and do it again until we achieve our goal. So because social distancing, we couldn't do anything in person, and that's why we created our virtual kind of a community of practice. We have our Facebook private group, and now we already held probably 7 sessions, webinar so far. On the topic in relation to anything that concerns our students' PhD studies, such as how to publish, right? How to publish and how to write literature review, how to collect data. And we also invited journal editors such as Brian Smith from the Cortical Journal to be our guest speaker. And at the same time, I try to shadow my students, not just my students, but also all the participants. So whenever we finish a session, they had to reflect on what I have learned, especially those novice researchers in the Google document. So I try to make my comments as well. Another project I'm currently doing is a book project. It's called Emergency Remote Teaching and Beyond, looking at commissioning 27 language teacher researchers around the world. It's currently under contract with Springer. So we try to make a companion case by looking at how teacher researchers could rise to the occasion using different new ways of teaching strategies or innovative kind of research approaches. So they are across all the continents. So the book is divided into 2 parts. We have a teacher's voice, teacher's corner, and researcher corner. Because this, the second part of my talk is about research. So I'm going to give you a sneak peek of the research corner. So what kind of different kind of research methods or approaches that those language teachers or researchers are using to collect the data or analyze the data during these most difficult times. So we have the ethics considerations and ethnographic research, using social media to do research, case study, phenomenological research, and mixed methods. As I mentioned earlier, so it's about ethics consideration, digital ethics, especially on social moral values. So how do you gather consent forms in a fully online remote kind of environment from your participants? And how do you conduct ethnographic research? For example, this author looking at Finnish, the heritage school in Canada, using different kind of data collection resources and also ethnographic research and using different data sources such as what the language teachers or students are doing in the platform and how to observe them remotely. Especially this one is so interesting, how to track, shadow, so-called digital ethnography or netographic kind of approach to gather your data using Facebook, like memes, right? Multimodal resources such as videos, emotion, emoticons. And I can't wait to read this chapter because it's just so innovative. And also mixed method research design. Now, I want to highlight what Stony Brook has already done so successfully here. So back in 2014, when we just started in the idea about delivering Korean, Japanese courses online. So working with Hee-jung, Erica, and Sarah, we started to explore, test it out, different kind of digital tools and see if they actually will enhance teaching and learning in a fully online mode. And then Erica started to teach her first online Japanese beginner unit, a course. We documented her journey and published in Modern Language Journal. And then finally, we shadowed Chicago when she taught her first online Japanese unit, a course, and then using action research kind of a design. This is my final slide. Bring everyone back to the title of my talk today. In every crisis lies opportunity. This is the best time it's a perfect time for us to reflect on what we are doing now. And if our teaching beliefs, approaches, and pedagogy is still working, if not, how we're going to upskill ourselves. If now is not a time, I don't know when it will be. So the sky's the limit. That's my talk. And I just want to open the floor to all of you. So any comments, input, thoughts, suggestion will be very appreciated.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. We have some questions here, so I'm going to read it. Excellent question here. How can we keep the magic and the power of teaching and learning that has been afforded by face-to-face conversation in the past? How do we maintain the intensity, focus, engagement, authenticity, and spontaneity for both students and instructors that have traditionally come from Q&A after class and from digressions from lectures and prompted by student questions? Also, maybe I would read related questions. How do we handle the moment-by-moment communicative challenges in remote teaching? So there's some bullets. How to interpret eye gaze and how to interpret visual distance. Equal visual distance no longer represents same degree of student engagement participation. And the third bullet, how do we manage turn allocation? Who speaks when? And when visual and oral access is optional, when people can turn off camera or turn off the microphone, and so those things are optional and dynamic. How do we manage coherence, consistency in audience design, participation structure?
So for me, I think that, do you guys remember when I talked about student ghosting? And that frustrated Jessica, the novice Chinese tutor, when she first told that. And she was like, I want to see everyone in a room so that I know they are late with me. But she couldn't see some of them. And because not just for Jessica's class, but for all the Asian language tutors and even coordinators online sessions, students just didn't feel comfortable turning on their microphone or cameras at the same time. They just like prefer taking a back seat. But does that mean they're not participating? They're still there, but they're just not present. They don't show their face. They don't show their voice. But that sometimes actually frustrates, the tutors, the lecturers, the teachers, because you're lacking the so-called telepresence or co-presence. So I think that creating a virtual community of practice is crucial. And maybe for teachers and also for lecturers, I think that you had to make students understand that we are here to support each other. We are here to learn from each other. So, it's not just me in a room, but you're also in a room. So I also need your support. I want to see you. I want to interact with you. But in the beginning, that might be challenging for students. So sometimes students will tell you, because when we actually follow up with the students, right? Because, the student goes in there. So we try to figure out why they didn't want to show their face. They didn't want to, just turn on the microphone. Guess what they told us? They said, because I just woke up, I didn't want to show my face like that. So sometimes I think that as a teacher, we probably had to adapt to the different needs or styles of the students as well. Another thing that I want to address is that using multimodality. So if you deliver online course, using discussion board as a synchronous way of communicating with students is a no-brainer, but you had to do more. You had to conduct a real-time, face-to-face, like real-time session, synchronous session with your students so that they know they could actually ask you questions, even interact with their peers in real time. So sometimes even in the online kind of virtual space, you can create a breakout rooms, like group discussions. So it's not just you talking, you can ask them to participate in some kind of activities that you usually do in the classroom. We try to simulate what we do in classroom in an online kind of a space, although it's not 100% feasible or possible. To a certain degree, you can still actually make it happen or in a way that is effective or that is so-called international authenticity.
Online mode is certainly transforming classroom interaction pattern. Yeah, who has the right to make policies about cameras?
I think it's a mutual agreement, understanding. I think it's not just because, that as a teacher, we can't force you to turn on your microphone or your camera because that's against your will. But everyone is participating in this virtual community practice. If you want to be part of the inner group, and you have to contribute somehow, in aging and angel program in our school, at the university. I mean, Curtin here, we noticed that a lot of students actually starting to get out of being remote from participating. I don't know about the States right now, but in Australia, especially at Curtin, you cannot penalize students for not participating. So if they don't come to classroom, they don't come to any session, you cannot penalize them as long as they submit their homework, they do the test, then that's it. So I was not used to it. Different country, different institution, and has different kind of policies. So I don't think that who has a right to say you should turn on the mic or you should turn on the camera is all the mutual understanding, because again, the key word is a virtual community of practice. Everyone has a role to play.
Thank you. If other people have some questions, please put in the chat box. Oh, I have one question here. Online teaching with technology means inserting the whole business into what we call artificial intelligence, AI, innovation that is taking place in society right now. AI is changing the labor market, rapidly pushing the conversation mode of workers out of jobs and creating new ones. Language teachers have made the same voice that we cannot give up face-to-face instruction. However, language teaching cannot be an exception now. After less than one semester of online teaching, online language teaching emerged as an opportunity as you present. How do you anticipate changes in trajectory of job market in language teaching when the machine learning takes over a central mode of learning?
As much as I embrace digital multimodal technology, I still think that we teachers have a role to play. Regardless of what kind of technology you're using, what kind of tools you're using, if you don't know how to design it, if you don't know how to interact with your students effectively, and if you don't know how to create an environment that is supportive, engaging, meaningful to your students, and if you don't know how to connect to your students on a personal, social level, it's not just teaching, but showing your care, your passion, your dedication. AI won't replace teachers. I think that we still have a role to play, and we are designer, we're creator, we cannot be replaceable, So I think that we still have a role to play. I think that technology could only go this far, but at the end of the day, it's all about a human connection.
It goes back to the idea of what it's teaching. It has to be based on like a human connection. Because some kind of knowledge transfer can be mechanical, but other kinds of teaching that fosters critical thinking and creative ideas have to come through interaction. And probably that is related to the first question that I read for you. But with our teamwork, like a teacher's dedication, research-oriented mind, working with the students, really hearing from students and getting help from that technology stuff, we can really recreate something that is essential for human interaction-based teaching, probably with eye contacts. Maybe we can come up with something creative, something that we don't miss any of what we do in the classroom.
I think that, as I mentioned earlier, I think as much as AI could actually do, or even do better than a teacher technically, when it comes to human element, for example, can an AI machine or robot crack a joke? Can a robot or AI actually do some spontaneous kind of interaction, like, making students laugh? I just feel like we still have a role to play, and as a teacher, and also I think that we are more authentic, like organic kind of a teaching couldn't be replaced by the AI. That's my take. That's my take on it. And also, I see Tracy posted a question: how can students make the best of learning a new language through remote learning? Some students actually don't feel comfortable learning online, but some students actually grab the chance, actually learn better online. And also they participate more online because sometimes you feel shy, you feel embarrassed to make any mistakes when you speak, talking language, especially a new language. But in an online space, you got some buffer. You don't have to show your face. You don't have to, sometimes you just can just hide behind a scene, but that can make you feel a little bit more comfortable to try to practice remotely. I think that, you had to practice more, absolutely, but you also had to communicate more. But also I think that you had to, just grab the opportunity to upskill yourself as a teacher as well. So I think the online space could be a double, like a double-edged sword. And some students in the beginning of COVID-19, they feel like they just lost the momentum because the teacher was not like watching them 24/7 or watching them in classroom. So they feel like they didn't get pushed to learn more. That's another very interesting kind of aspect.
It was really great to have Dr. Chen. Many of us are really happy to see you because we know you, and then we are watching your research. You're so productive, and you work with so many researchers and teachers globally. We hope we continue working together, and then best wishes for your new books that they are so exciting. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas, teaching, and emergency remote teaching situations and research. And we were so benefited from your today's talk. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much too. Pleasure was mine. Thank you. And thank you, Agnes, so much for inviting me. And I'm so happy to see all of you, Sarah, Hee-jung, and Jungwon, and everyone here. I just feel like I'm home now. Thank you.
Just a little announcement. Our next talk will be on October 21st by Dr. Ryuko Kubota in University of British Columbia. The topic is critical language teaching through anti-racist lens. We look forward to seeing you again. Agnes, would you like to say something?
Well, thank you, Julian, again for this wonderful inaugural online Zoom MIC lecture. So this is it's wonderful for us, and especially wonderful for us to have an opportunity to have you back with us for a brief moment. But we are all inspired by your work, and we will stay in touch. And thank you very much. And I would like to thank Professor Eriko Sato and the entire MIC staff team for making this possible. Amazing work. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.